So both of you are originally from places other than Oklahoma. How are you finding Oklahoma life, and how has living in Oklahoma shaped your artistic practice? Irmgard, let's start with you.
I love it. I moved here in 2003, immigrated from the Netherlands, and I love it. I love the open spaces compared to where I'm from. I love that there's not many people around. And it gives me lots of inspiration just by not having the structured life I had in the Netherlands.
Excellent. And Molly?
I moved to Oklahoma from western Montana almost 11 years ago, and it was, in some respects, it was not a very dramatic move because it was familiar in the sense that there was a large indigenous community and a western community. I joked that when I moved here, part of the reason I was looking at Tulsa, Oklahoma, is I wanted to go to a place where I could unironically wear cowboy boots to an art opening. And that was something that was important to me, but also to be in a place where cities had an edge and where I could drive past the edge of the city. Coming from a state with fewer than 1 million people, that was still important to me to have that open space. But there's also, some pretty big environmental differences. Tornadoes, insects, the biology is incredibly different, and that's been interesting to adapt to after living in one place for an entire lifetime and being really intimately connected to that landscape, to remake yourself in a new landscape and to find out how you relate to it. And I think it's been interesting to see how that parallels to the experience of a lot of other indigenous peoples in Oklahoma who were based in a different landscape and then moved to this place and remade themselves here. So it's been interesting to do that personally and then learn about the other tribes here who've done that collectively.
Yes. So working with fibers is present in both your works, be it to fasten beads or on its own. What are some constraints or points of ease you have discovered in working with fiber as a medium? Molly, let's start with you.
I think the biggest constraint is that it's slow. And so taking an idea from beginning to finish is a slow process rather than being able to sketch something out quickly or digitally draw or some other options like that. And another constraint is that I find it hard to work with a studio assistant or partnerships or collaboration because so much of what I know is self-taught or not standardized. So it's very difficult to collaborate or to exchange with another person because there aren't very many standards. On the other hand, I feel pretty free to experiment and to combine lots of different scrap and fun collage and paper and fiber and beads. And so I feel like I'm maybe less constrained by the same rules that don't give me a lot of standards.
Very good. And Irmgard?
Yes, I think the restraints are that it's slow. It takes a lot of time, and I think it's that because the fibers, you always have vertical you have straight lines. It's hard to show more organic work, but I find my ways around it. But and that's the intriguing part, I think, for me. It's because there's restraints, I have to come all the time up with different solutions for what I want to show. And I think that's, for me, so far the limit. I'm still exploring. So I'm just working a year with the fiber. So it's in my artwork. So I'm still exploring, and I hope to overcome more restraints over the years.
How does storytelling enter the process of art making for you? Irmgard?
Storytelling is really important. I feel like with every painting I create, mixed media painting. I'm telling a story, and I noticed long time back that every time I create something, I'm thinking about a story. So by writing them down while I create something, I recall memories, heartbreaks, painful memories, good memories come back, and especially being from a different country, and I don't have anyone to talk to here. All my family is still overseas. It's for me a way to recoup loneliness and happiness, and a lot of those things come back in storytelling. So telling my story, what I can communicate with the people I can communicate with here in my own language, is my way of telling the story in my paintings.
Excellent, thank you. And Molly?
Storytelling is sometimes central to what I'm doing, or sometimes I guess more obvious when I'm doing narrative pieces that are specifically addressing a place or an idea. And then there's another segment of my work that is pure form or playing with form, and that might have a narrative root in it originally, but I get to a point where I'm taking apart all of those individual elements and playing with them in a formal way. The storytelling parts are compared to the formal explanations are so different, even though I think sometimes to an audience they might not look that different. A lot of my storytelling pieces tend to be the larger monumental 4 feet by 6 feet, and a lot of cartography and map based pieces, whereas I think my formal explorations are modular, multi-piece installations or groupings. So I found that different formats and different scale work for different modes, whether it's storytelling or formal exploration.
How do you find inspiration in nature? What is your process of finding and recreating the beauty in your own lens, Molly?
An element of nature plays really strongly in my work, especially when I'm working with botanical and floral elements. I often use cartography and topo maps to directly represent place, but then also use beaded floral images to tie in the botany of that place. And also I've done a lot of pieces with imagery of threatened or endangered species, especially insect and bird species, although occasionally mammals and shellfish. And so for me, representing place is an integral, and not just the place, but all of the animated and semi-animated beings that occupy that is an integral part of beadwork and parfleche painting, which is the source of nearly all the designs I use in my beadwork-based art. And so going back and referencing those plants, those floral plants, those species, is important to me to bring those into the cartography and the other representations, to pair them all together, so to show that they're linked.
Wonderful. And Irmgard, what's your process of finding and recreating the beauty of nature in your own lens?
Well, for me, it's a never-ending inspiration. I love to hike and walk, and I live on a big ranch, or work on a big ranch, and you just go out, and that's my inspiration. I love everything about it. Insects, birds, my horses. It's a constant play with light. What inspires me, sunrises, sunsets, it's all big influence for me. I cannot live in a city, that's for sure. I've done that for 8 years during my study, but I need to be outside and breathe it in and breathe it out, and show it in my work.
how do your identities structure the process and outcome of your works?
Identity has been a core driver of what I've been doing from the very beginning, even before I contemplated a career in art. I grew up in a lot of deep poverty and with a very rural background with wood stoves, not running water, sometimes long stretches without electricity. And so I felt that there are parts of my childhood that span time periods where a lot of my experiences were from what I would call more of a frontier, background, and also different class with poverty and with living in housing authority apartments and really shack substandard housing, and also being raised by grandparents from the Depression era. So there's a lot of different ways that my identity straddles different generations or different classes or different technology time periods. And then also my cultural identity as being both Native and Irish immigrant, and trying to, honor a lot of the backgrounds, especially in fiber art, of women who came before me in quilting and embroidery and their handwork and what that means to me. So I would say almost all of my work is trying to figure out identity and to find a way to make it balance and to find a way to honor all of those different threads and stories as they come forward, and frankly to untangle them because they are very jumbled and very confusing at times to have your identity membership layered in so many ways, in so many time periods, and so many skill sets and so many value systems can be incredibly confusing. And for me, art is the logical, if that makes any sense, the logical way to untangle those things and honor them while also exploring them.
Wonderful. And Irmgard, how do your identities structure the process and outcome of your works?
Well, I'm number 9 of a big family. So I have 8 siblings and parents who grew up in the war. So I think being part of that big family and a mother who was a seamstress, always being next to her and sitting next to her, I think that kind of created a lot of my interest in working for what I'm doing now. I kind of was always a painter. I painted abstract. I never worked with fibers and textiles. But when I opened one of my boxes, what my mother saved for me a year ago or 1.5 years ago, a whole world went open for me with lots of memories and lots of feelings I had growing up in this big creative family. So when I think that, starting with the fiber and the fabrics, what I found in my mother's box, and creating my work now, I think that has a lot to do with bringing my identity in my work.